So there are many different models from the traditional one-crop agricultural system. Agroecology, biological agriculture, biodiversity agriculture, polyculture. Could you say me what is the difference between permaculture and these models?
Yes, well, in understanding permaculture at that level, that it was originally conceived as the redesign of agriculture, permaculture came out of the broader history of organic agriculture or biological agriculture, which had its origins in both Europe and North America in the 1930s, when the first awareness about the problems of industrial agriculture emerged. So in a way, in the 1970s, there was a reinvigoration of these ideas and a great further spreading from the original pioneers of that period. And permaculture can, in that way, be seen as a branch off the tree of organic agriculture, building on the insights and methods that are common to organic or biological agriculture, but also adding other particular focus. And the particular focus that permaculture added was that we should be providing more of our food from perennial plants and, where possible, from trees, because agriculture being dependent on annual crops was a structural and ecological vulnerability, a weakness in traditional agriculture. So although permaculture might be seen in contrast to monoculture, so in that sense this is polyculture, that's one very important idea in permaculture. But that was true in the whole lineage of organic agriculture. Now, of course, we can see many certified organic agricultural farms that are effectively monocropping. But if we look at the origins of organics and in its full development, of course, polyculture was inherent to that. So permaculture was not adding that as a new thing, but the focus on trees and perennial crops as a greater part of our the focus of agriculture was not unique to permaculture, because there was the idea of Russell Smith on tree crops, which of course came out of that 1930s period, but this very strong focus on forests as an ecological model and trees, the diversity of trees and how we could provide more of our needs. If we look at some of these other terms, the overlap between them of what we might call biological or organic agriculture, agroecology and permaculture is very strong. If we take agroecology, agroecology has a lineage more associated with academia and research, agricultural research, and has been more effective in many developing countries in introducing ideas that can be seen to have intellectual status along conventional scientific agriculture. Whereas permaculture has really started more as a very grassroots process, bypassing the academic sort of research field, more at the practitioner experimenter level, both in affluent countries and in developing countries. And there, of course, there's some strengths and weaknesses in that. That means that permaculture systems are often more poorly documented and do not have as much sort of research evidence behind them as systems that are identified as agroecology. But essentially, I see more commonality between these things. Another comparison I would make that's quite an issue quite often in Australia is the differences and similarities between biodynamic agriculture and permaculture.
Yes.
And in Australia, I think biodynamic agriculture, which has of course come out of the lineage from Steiner's work, which is one of the important branches of organic agriculture, has a strong emphasis on the methods of husbandry of soil, of plants and of animals, whereas permaculture has a strong emphasis on design, both in a physical layout sense of how farms are organised, in a spatial sense, but also how they are organised over time in an evolutionary sequence. Now this design aspect of permaculture and this focus on very particular forms of organic husbandry of biodynamics, a lot of people see as complementary, rather than because they are sort of focusing on slightly different aspects. Now, some of the critique that is made of permaculture from a biodynamic point of view is sometimes, all of that design stuff is just common sense. But the trouble is that it is no longer common.
Yes.
Yes.
So, because in the modern world, a lot of the traditional common sense of how long co-evolved farming landscapes and farming systems worked over long periods of time is broken. The world has changed and people do not understand how to reconstruct that, and that may no longer be appropriate.
Okay.
So permaculture is introducing this idea that, well, we must take what we have and build something new. So this is also a contrast with people focusing on the reinvigoration of tradition. And I had this discussion in Italy in '94 with Giannazzo Puzzi, who translated Permaculture 1 into Italian. And he himself had been very influenced by many modern ecological ideas. But he said to me that now we see our task is to rediscover as much as possible of tradition. And he had a man working with him who he described as one of the last true peasants of his region. And he said we must just allow this man to work and try to understand what he is doing. And I can see how people in places like Italy and in Japan would put quite a strong focus on this from an ecological perspective, that we have lost a lot of things that we still don't understand about tradition. But my emphasis coming, and permaculture coming from Australia, which is in some ways a new country, but with all this very broken heritage of Indigenous Aboriginal culture and many, many migrant cultures, we take for granted that we have to build something new from many different pieces.
Yes.
Yes.
So, but I accept that in places like Italy and Japan that clearly have histories of sustainable agricultural use, part of the task of permaculture design is rediscovery. Perhaps more of the task. Not all of it, but part of it. So, I don't see a sort of a thing that a particular thing that makes permaculture different or unique in that regard.
So permaculture can be complements to the other models. A sort of
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And I think this is also, I can maybe add to that in another way, like one of the ideas in permaculture is, of course, of integration of crops and animals together, and of tree crops and annuals together. So if we say this in Australia, that we should, or the United States and many other countries, we look at agriculture and say, well, we have animal farms over here, often animals in large sheds, and then we have crops over here, and they are not connected, they are not integrated.
Yes.
But from a permaculture point of view, these should be put together, and that we have trees and annual crops, we should grow these together in combinations. If we said this to a person connected to the land in a Neapolitan person, they might say, well, this is what all the old people did. What is new about this idea? But somewhere like Australia or the United States, this is quite a new idea. But on the other hand, when I was in Italy in the 90s and talking to people about harvesting water off the roof or collecting it in dams for use in agriculture and in the houses, they would say, this is a strange idea, this is new. But if you said that permaculture to an Australian is collecting water off the roof or collecting it in dams, they'd say, so what? All farmers, all rural people have always done this.
Yes.
Yep. So that in different places in the world, permaculture brings design solutions from somewhere else where the problem has been so severe that an elegant design solution has been developed, and brings it to other places where the problem, whatever that problem or design issue was, has not been so severe, so people have ignored the issue. So, for example, permaculture teachers coming from Australia to poor developing country projects, often water supply in villages is a critical issue because groundwater systems have become dry or contaminated, streams have dried up or become contaminated, and people have no history of water harvesting because they didn't need to. So bringing a vernacular technology from Australia is, okay, this is a permaculture idea, but it is very well developed in Australia as not particularly a permaculture thing, just an ordinary thing. So we see that everywhere in the world, that permaculture can bring these ideas from another tradition, from another place, and say, we can combine this with things that are already here.